All right, let's flip the page, get your sense of news making headlines on today's papers. I'll kick things off with the front page of the Sowetan. No surprises that this story is garnering so much attention. Transparency wins the day is the headline that they're going with. This, of course, is in relation to that Apex Court ruling that found that, indeed, part of the Executive Ethics Code are unconstitutional in that it doesn't compel members of the executive to disclose donors in internal political party campaigns. It's quite a mouthful, but essentially, if anybody is running an internal party campaign, they now are compelled, once the amendments have been made, to make known who their donors are. The implications, of course, are far-reaching, but what's important there, and this is the sentiment captured on the Sowetan, is that the CR17 bank statements and those who founded the NDZ campaign back in 2017 for the ANC's conference, I beg your pardon, elective conference, those details are likely to remain a secret. That's because, as we know, the law is not retrospective. In other words, it will affect things moving forward, but it's unlikely to affect what has already unfolded. In fact, there's already been comments said that because of the time given by the Apex Court, this particular ruling is unlikely to have a bearing even on the upcoming December conference. I wonder whether or not Godongwane is pleased with that, especially because the principle here is still around there being some kind of transparency. We'll get Godongwane's reaction within the hour, so stick around for that as we make sense of the implications of that particular ruling. The Cape Times is going on a story that we've also watched quite closely, and that's around South Africa's happiness index. We typically speak to a professor of economics, well-being economics from the University of Johannesburg for this. That's Professor Greiling. And today we're told that a lot of the sentiments that emerged from the last kind of survey they took are actually not great at all. It's fear, it's loathing. Loathing, of course, that's a deep-seated hate and disgust in the country. You know, a country obviously led by Cyril Ramaphosa, and that's why they're calling it Cyril's essay on the Cape Times. And a lot of these sentiments actually come off the back of the stage 6 load shedding that was announced on Sunday. So the happiness index, we're told, dropping from an average of 6.85 earlier this year, which isn't high, by the way, now sitting at 6.44, and that is because of the many issues we're facing in this country, including load shedding, of course, the high cost of living, as well as crime. So some of the emotions here are anger, disgust, fear, those increasing far above average levels, we're told, with the announcement of these renewed load shedding, renewed power cuts as well. And in fact, it's a story on the Pretoria News today. If you take a look at that, they're unpacking the biggest obstacles to the Eskom solution. It was, I think, DA leader John Steenhuisen yesterday who said what we should perhaps look at, and you think this is obvious, but it's amazing that we're not getting it right, is removing politicians from this entire process and allowing the experts to take over so that they can get to a point where we finally have sustainable and continuous energy supply. That obviously hasn't happened, and that's really what some people are saying about how Eskom has been allowed to fall so far from grace. I mean, it's hard to believe now, but Eskom at some stage used to have excess power. We used to supply some power to neighboring countries because we had enough, and it's phenomenal that even just on Sunday, Eskom is now saying that we're now looking to other countries in the region who might have excess power to give us some energy to help. The question, of course, is which countries are those? Because last time I checked, the region is certainly struggling to give out sustainable energy. But anyway, that cabinet meeting is happening today. Hopefully we'll have more details around what on earth is taking place. Politics, of course, not too far from business today. Tumisang? Absolutely not, and that's what's on the business day. Quite a lot happening there, but before we get to that juicy political story, just to carry on with the cabinet meeting that is expected today, the headline to this morning is that cabinet is tipped to mull changes at Eskom, and here they're talking about changes, considering changes to the Eskom board. You referenced earlier, a short while ago, really, about why experts should not be the ones who are at the forefront of fixing the energy crisis. So if there are going to be these changes in the Eskom board by politicians, it's going to be interesting who then is booted out and who is going to be the seemingly new broom that sweeps the Eskom crisis currently. About that, by the way, it also shouldn't be lost to us that the Eskom board has never really been fully capacitated. There have been so many vacancies for years. The exact numbers escape me now, but I know that, you know, a substantial part of the Eskom board hasn't even been filled yet. So when we talk about making changes to the sport, before we fill those vacancies, one wonders whether or not that will make a difference.
We'll have to wait and see, really, because some of these changes that have been reported could be the filling of those vacant spots. You know how we loosely use changes and reshuffle in South Africa, but we'll really have to wait for the outcomes of that report. So the juicy story you want to touch on, it's reported here Godongwane wants ANC purse strings. He's already controlling the purse of the country, but this story is talking about the minister planning to raise his hand to stand for the position of Treasurer General. It's going to be an interesting race in the ANC, really, because constituencies is what speaks volumes, where your voting support comes from. And I'm wondering, with Godongwane's pool, is it enough to outseat the current Treasurer General?
Interesting, because Godongwane was in Luthuli House.
Yes.
Then he went to government when Ndlovu resigned suddenly. Interesting that he wants to go back to Luthuli House. Perhaps a lot to read into that. But again, we'll keep watching the space in the lead up to December. Those are your front pages. Tumi Kgasoe with us as always for a sense of what's happening in sports. Good morning.
Absolutely. Good morning. I've got the Sowetan. They are reflecting on the SA auction still, but honing in on the story of Thabo Godongwane obviously not being selected. But they're looking at that reaction from one of the coaches in actually the tournament. He will be coaching the Durban Super Kings, Lance Kloosner. We know him very well. He played for the Proteas for a very long time. But what he's saying is that there's a lot of competition for players, and it shows that it does not necessarily mean that if you're a good player in South Africa, that you're also considered a good player around the world. Remember, there's a lot of players around the world that were chosen at the auction as a whole. And it's quite unfortunate because Thabo Godongwane obviously will be leading South Africa in the T20 World Cup next month. So that's why it was a big story.
Has he said anything just out of interest?
Nothing yet.
Yeah.
Still yet to hear from him. And then let's move on to an article online where the big headline saying Formula One calendar expands to 24 races for 2023, but it won't be coming to South Africa.
Wow.
What we know about the calendar is that obviously it's going to be a first time for Las Vegas, but we did have reports saying that perhaps it might come to Africa as a whole. And I was just looking at the different shares in terms of the races around the country. There's 9 in Europe, 8 in Asia, 4 North America, 1 each in South America and Australia, none in Africa. And as much as we were hoping that it will come to South Africa, I remember reading an article saying that we were going to be included if one race was not going to be held in Belgium. However, Belgium has been included in the calendar. But the question was, were we going to be able to afford to host a race in South Africa? There were reports that Patrice Motsepe was willing to fund 590 million rand. However, there was still no funding for Kyalami Circuit to be upgraded. It needed 100 million rand for that.
I'm sure that's nothing for Patrice. I mean, if he's willing and able. But a shame, man. We would actually really hope that this would come to South Africa.
I mean, we did have Lewis Hamilton saying that I'd love to see a race in Africa, but hey, I think we still
Lewis Hamilton, who told us not a day passes without him thinking of Nelson Mandela. So anyway, shame, man. All right, Tumi Kgasoe, thanks very much indeed. Back again within the hour for a full sports bulletin. It brings